My name is Mike Hiestand. I am Senior Legal Counsel for the Student Press Law Center.
So you want to talk a little bit about what the center that you're involved in does?
Sure. So the Student Press Law Center, we're a nonprofit organization. We're based back in Washington, D.C. I'm actually lucky to live out in Washington State. But we've been around, this year, we've been around exactly 50 years. And our whole reason for being in business is to provide free legal help and information to student journalists, both at the high school level and college level, on pretty much every media law issue that might come up for them. Unfortunately, censorship remains the number one reason that students call us, certainly at the high school level, and it's kind of the reason we got founded.
Awesome. And when did you decide personally to get involved in this area of law?
So I love journalism. I fully intended to be a journalist. I was enrolled in journalism school for college, and as part of that program, we were required to take a media law course. And for whatever reason, things just clicked. I really enjoyed that course. Seemed to have an affinity for the law, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So lucky, I was very fortunate. I mean, I went to law school mainly to do First Amendment and media law work, and I was, very fortunate to actually have that opportunity once I got out.
And when did you first learn about Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeier?
Pretty much immediately. I mean, I was, tuned into the First Amendment media law world while in high school. But Hazelwood came down in 1988, and in 1989, I had just finished my first year of law school and took a legal internship with the Student Press Law Center. So Hazelwood was a big part of my legal career from the very beginning.
Awesome. In your time advising high school student journalists, have you seen, or really, how have you seen the effects of this case play out and ultimately its decision?
It's been enormous. I mean, it's the reason that they hired me on full time. I mean, the number of legal calls coming into the Student Press Law Center's legal hotline, just started going up. We knew it was going to have a significant impact on student journalists, and it did. I mean, we saw over the years we've seen kind of a fivefold increase in the number of calls that were coming into our hotline. In 1988, we were getting about 500 calls a year. And several years later, that number had jumped up to closer to 2,500. So, yeah, from the very beginning, it is it had a significant impact on the sort of work that I do and on student journalism generally.
And with the students that you are advising, what are the main topics or themes that you're seeing school administrators view as outside the bounds of what is acceptable in a high school setting?
So, Hazelwood gave to school officials, significant authority to censor. Up until the Hazelwood case came down in 1988, the law was the Tinker case. There was this, lots of people know it as the armband case, and that really did strike I think, a reasonable balance between the need of school officials to maintain an orderly sort of learning environment and the rights of students to express themselves. And Hazelwood really just kind of threw that balance out. And so for school officials that are really, bent on pushing the authority that Hazelwood gave them as far as it can go, it really does give them significant authority. Basically, it allows them to censor material simply by declaring it, poorly written or inappropriate, or a line from the case. School officials can censor speech that's, quote, inconsistent with the shared values of a civilized social order, whatever that is. So it really did give the school officials, significant censorship authority, and many of them have used it. I mean, a lot of people think that, the number one thing that school officials are censoring or stories on sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that sort of thing. And that's just not the case. I mean, the number one predictor, I think, of whether a story is going to be censored is whether or not school officials, for whatever reason, think that story makes them look bad. If it creates bad PR for the school, if it points fingers at particular school officials for something they've done, those are the sorts of stories that you can pretty safely predict they're going to have some censorship issues.
Hmm. And in a similar light of that last question, how have you seen this case impact different forms of media other than the original print media that was at hand originally with this case?
So it's interesting, when I started in the early '90s full time, there was no internet, and so the print student newspaper, particularly at a high school, was the way. It was kind of the one of the main ways that students found their voices. There weren't a lot of other options. I mean, you could send a letter to the editor of the local newspaper, but it was up to that editor, to choose to publish it. So when a student print paper was censored, I mean, we had to fight it really, really hard because it was the game. I mean, if you were able to
Hmm.
censor the student newspaper, that was it. Obviously, things have changed since then, and we now have, students have a whole host of other sorts of speech tools that are
Sure.
available to them. The good news is that courts have made clear, at least Hazelwood makes clear, that it only applies to school-sponsored student media. So for any sort of speech, like personal social media accounts, personal websites, things like that, that exist, Hazelwood doesn't cover that. So we've certainly, while school officials will attempt to censor some of those things, students today do have options that didn't exist in 1988.
Interesting. And how do you think um, our current media landscape would be different if the Supreme Court sided with the students rather than the school administrators?
I mean, Hazel is a horrible civics lesson. I mean, students are learning about the First Amendment in their civics class, in one classroom, and then being told, they can't practice it in their other.
Hmm.
Their school officials are censoring, a well-written, well-reported story that ought to see the light of day, and that's just a horrible civics lesson. I think, it has had an impact. I mean, we've seen civics education just kind of go down the toilet in recent years. I mean, I saw some statistics that said, like 0.5% of a student's time is spent learning, civics education. And I think that that's kind of been borne out. I think there's just a serious lack of understanding of civics education generally, but a free press and what the First Amendment is all about more specifically. So it's just, again, it's just a horrible civics lesson that many students are having to dig out from under.
Sure. And to combat the effects that this case is having on our current media landscape, what steps can states or even the federal government take to restore some of the rights that students had prior to the Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeier decision?
So Hazelwood is a federal First Amendment case. It provides basically the floor of federal legal protection. States, local governments, districts, they can't pass laws or rules that provide less protection than that required by the federal First Amendment, by the Hazelwood case. But they can always pass laws that provide their citizens with more protection, more free speech protection. And that's what we've seen. Since immediately after Hazelwood was passed, we started to see this movement of states, of grassroots movements in states passing laws that gave back to their student journalists some of the legal rights they had prior to the Hazelwood case. These we now call them, when they were initially passed, they were called anti-Hazelwood laws. Kind of the marketers got involved. Now they're called New Voices laws, but they basically do the same thing. They basically give back to students some of the legal protections they had under the Tinker standard, the armband case standard that existed prior to Hazelwood, and they make all the difference. I mean, the very first question I will ask a student that's calling with a censorship issue is, "What state are you calling from?" 18 states in the country have passed these New Voices laws, and if you're in one of those 18 states, I can usually give you good news. If you're in one of the other states, it can be a little bit iffy. But definitely, if anybody's interested in combating Hazelwood and kind of pushing back against it and standing up for student voices, these New Voices laws have made a significant difference.
Interesting. And if students similar to those who were involved with the Hazelwood journalism class approached you today with a similar issue at topic at mind, what advice would you give them going about the current legal challenges that they face.
Yeah, you bet. So it's interesting. I wasn't working at the Student Press Law Center in 1982, 83, which is kind of when the whole situation went down at Hazelwood High School. But my understanding is that either the students or some of the attorneys working with the students there actually did call the Student Press Law Center, and we would have analyzed it under the current law at the time, which was this Tinker case. And under Tinker, students had the right to engage in free speech or engage in work on their student newspaper. They had the right to publish unless their articles were unlawful. Things like, libel and invasion of privacy and things like that, or unless they were seriously disruptive to normal school activities. If they were lawful, if they were legally clean, and if they were not disruptive, they were protected. And when you read the Hazelwood article, it's legally clean. There was nothing in it that presented any sort of legal problem. It was also not the sort of article that was going to create a serious physical disruption of normal school activity. So under the law that existed when the facts of Hazelwood came down, it was a really easy case. And in fact, the Eighth Circuit recognized that. I mean, in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, they actually wrote a decision in the Hazelwood case before it got to the Supreme Court, which we would have written at the Student Press Law Center. I mean, it basically said this is an easy case under existing law. School officials went too far. We would have told them, continue on, keep doing what you're doing. You're actually, you're doing good journalism and you're operating under the law.
Awesome. And moving forward, what can students do today to get involved with this issue?
So, I think, these new voices laws, it's a big movement. There are chapters in most of the states where there are people trying to get these laws passed in the remaining states. You can go to our website, splc.org. We have a whole bunch of information there. We can point you in the right direction to get you hooked up with some of the local organizers if that's what you're interested in. But the biggest thing I think students can do is just to do good journalism and continue to practice, journalism in the way that it should be practiced. I tell students all the time that, your only job as a journalist is to decide what the news is. What is it important for your readers to know? And then once you've decided that, cover the story, do the work, do good journalism, good reporting, good writing, all that stuff you're learning in class. Don't self-censor. If school officials are going to censor, let them censor. Don't you be the ones to censor. Give us a ring and we can help you push back. There's lots of different, like I said, the landscape has changed. There are lots of other speech tools that are available. There may be some legal protections that are available too. So that's my job. Yeah, I operate our free legal hotline, and I talk with students, that are having these issues all the time. So don't take no for an answer.
All right, awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to address for the audience that we haven't covered thus far today?
I can't think of anything. No, I think you did a good job.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.